One of the best parts about HDR Efex Pro 2 is that the initial merge looks really great right off the bat, very realistic and natural looking. In our case here, though, we could use a little extra punch and contrast. So to do that, we're going to utilize the tone compression section and the tonality section of HDR Efex Pro 2. Now, the tone compression slider in the upper right-hand corner is going to help us to balance out all of the information that we've captured within our exposure series. So if we bring the tone compression slider to the right, what happens is the shadows actually get brighter and the highlights get darker. It compresses this information. If we bring the tone compression slider to the left, the image will generally look a lot more like a single image exposure because our shadows will go much darker and our highlights will get much brighter. In our case, I want to balance out these tones. So I'm going to bring the tone compression to about 32%. This is going to help to darken down the shadows, darken down the highlights a little bit, but brighten up the shadows for a nice balance between this full range of information that we've captured. Now, the method strength slider is a really fantastic control as well. This can help to increase or decrease the HDR method effects. And we'll be going in depth into the HDR method effects and adjustments in another video. Right now it's set to normal, realistic, and natural, which is going to give us a very natural and realistic look. Now, the reason I might want to bring my method strength up is because it's going to help to increase the fine detail and add a little bit of extra contrast right off the bat. So I'll bring that up to about 75%, and now we're starting to get a little bit of that punch. From there, though, I want to be able to control the contrast as well as my highlights and shadows. So we click on the word tonality on the right-hand side of the interface to open up the tonality section, where we can then control exposure, shadows, highlights, and so on. Now with that, I want to brighten up the entire photograph right off the bat. So let's bring the exposure up a little bit, maybe about 20% or so. From there, we can then control the shadows and the highlights. But to do this, I want to be able to utilize my histogram. So if we move into the lower right-hand corner, I'll go from the loop function to the histogram by clicking on the histogram. And then we can toggle between our three different channels, red, green, and blue, as well as a luminosity channel. And our multicolored histogram is going to give us the overall histogram, if you will, with all of our channels included. Now, the reason I want that open is so when we go into our highlights and we maybe brighten up the brighter tones in the image, we can keep an eye on the brightest tones and make sure that we don't blow them out, if you will. Now, I want to brighten them up, but I don't want to go too far. So let's take the highlights up to about 45%. The shadows look pretty good overall to me. We could possibly brighten them up in this case. From there, we could then control the contrast, which is going to give us this nice bump, this great punch in the image. And when we're done with the contrast, we might want to set our blacks and our whites sliders. Now, the difference between the shadows and highlights and the blacks and whites. The shadows and highlights will actually affect the brighter portions, being the highlights, and the darkest portions, being the shadows, in all of the information that we are merging together from our exposure series. Whereas the blacks and the white sliders will actually help us to set the current black point and current white point. Meaning if our highlights weren't necessarily as bright as we wanted, or our white point isn't as bright as we wanted it to be, we could always punch that up a little bit, bring it to the right to brighten up those whites. If the blacks were maybe too dark, we could take the black slider up into the right, and what you'll notice is those really dark shadows here on the left-hand side of the image, we're going to be able to brighten those up. Of course, watching the histogram the entire time to make sure we get the tones that we want. To finish off the photo, with our tonality section, we of course have structure. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with structure is basically texture. Bring this one to the right, and it's going to enhance that texture. It's going to bring out these nice fine textures. Bring it down into the left, and we can create more of a painterly-like feel overall in the image. I want to add just a little bit of extra structure here, so we'll bring it up into the right, and now we've got this great texture. If we take a look at our before and after using the compare button in the upper left-hand corner, here's the original image as we merged it, and the enhanced image. Now that we're done with the tonality section, we've got this really fantastic tonal range and great texture and depth within the photo. When we're all done, we click the OK button in the lower right-hand corner, and that's going to bring us back over into our host software.